Frank Harmon's weathered hands moved methodically across the wooden porch railing, sanding away years of Arizona sun damage with practiced precision. At 68, his movements retained a fluid economy that belied his age. The morning sun cast long shadows across his 17 acres of farmland, the property his grandfather had claimed nearly a century ago. The land had been in the Harmon family for 3 generations, though Frank was the last of his line now. He paused to stretch his back, scanning the perimeter of his property with a gaze that never quite lost its vigilance. 22 years in the Army Rangers had permanently altered how he saw the world. Everything was terrain, cover, vantage points, and potential threats. The habit of constant awareness had never left him, even 15 years into retirement. The farm sat 10 miles north of the Mexican border in Cochise County, Arizona, close enough to hear occasional Border Patrol helicopters, far enough that most trouble passed him by. At least, that had been true until recently. Frank wiped sweat from his brow with a faded bandana he kept in the pocket of his worn denim work shirt. To anyone passing by, he was just another aging rancher tending to his modest spread. Nothing remarkable about the lean, silver-haired man with the slight limp in his right leg. The locals knew him as quiet but fair, showing up for community events without drawing attention, always willing to help a neighbor fix a fence or jump a dead battery. None of them knew about the room behind his pantry, where shadow boxes displayed his silver star, bronze star with V device, and 3 purple hearts. They hadn't seen the photographs of a younger Frank, face painted in camouflage, standing with his ranger platoon in the Vietnamese highlands or later with his special operations team in Panama. That Frank Harmon was someone else from another lifetime. "Morning, Sergeant Major," he muttered to himself, an old ritual that marked the start of each day. Though he'd been just Frank for years now, part of him would always be Sergeant Major Harmon, 2nd Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment. After finishing the porch rail, Frank moved inside the old farmhouse. The interior was Spartan but comfortable, solid furniture built to last. Minimal decoration except for a few family photographs and a hand-carved eagle a war buddy had made for him. On the mantel sat a picture of Maria, his wife of 30 years, gone 5 years now to cancer. Beside it stood a photo of them on their wedding day, Frank in his dress uniform, ramrod straight and serious-eyed even on that joyous occasion. Frank put on coffee and methodically prepared a simple breakfast: 2 eggs, toast, half an avocado. He ate without hurry or distraction, meticulously cleaning his plate when finished. His habits were military precise. Bed made with hospital corners every morning, clothes arranged by function, tools always returned to their exact places. The doctor at the VA had once suggested these rigid routines might be related to his PTSD, but Frank had always been this way, even before Vietnam. The military had just reinforced his natural tendencies. After breakfast, Frank changed into running clothes, another daily ritual that had survived decades of service and into retirement. His right knee protested as he stretched on the porch, the result of a parachute landing that had gone sideways during a night insertion near the Cambodian border in 1972. The doctors at the VA hospital in Tucson had suggested a replacement years ago. Frank had nodded politely and kept running. He started slowly down the long dirt driveway, his stride gradually smoothing out as his body warmed. 3 miles every morning, regardless of weather. In Phoenix's summer heat or rare winter frost, Frank ran. The route took him along the perimeter of his property, allowing him to check fences and survey the land while maintaining his conditioning. At the halfway point of his run, Frank crested a small rise that offered a view of the surrounding countryside. He stopped there, as was his habit, controlling his breathing while scanning through landmarks. His property line to the south, marked by a fence that needed repair. The Rogers place to the east, with its distinctive red barn. The highway to the north, where he counted vehicles, 3 Border Patrol, 1 sheriff's cruiser, several civilian trucks and cars. The desert stretching westward, mesquite and cacti broken occasionally by arroyos that would flood during the monsoon season. Something caught his attention, a flash of sunlight reflecting off metal where it shouldn't be, about half a mile beyond his western boundary. Frank narrowed his eyes, focusing on the spot. Nothing moved, but his instincts hummed with warning. He changed his route, cutting across country toward the location. 20 minutes later, Frank knelt beside fresh tire tracks in the sandy soil. The vehicle had pulled off the old access road, driven about 50 yards into the cover of a mesquite thicket, and stopped. Footprints led away from the site, 2 sets, both men judging by the size, one heavier than the other. They had walked to a vantage point overlooking his property, waited there long enough to leave cigarette butts, then returned to their vehicle. Frank picked up one of the discarded cigarettes, examining the brand Ferros, not common in the U.S., but popular in Mexico. He pocketed the evidence and methodically erased his own tracks as he departed, a habit from long-range reconnaissance that had saved his life more than once. Back at the house, Frank showered and dressed, then placed a call to his old friend Bill Mercer at the sheriff's department. "Bill, it's Frank Harmon. Got a minute?" "For you?" "Always." "What's up, Frank?" "Had some visitors scouting my west side this morning. Any reports of unusual activity out my way?" There was a pause on the line. "Funny you should ask. We've had reports of cartel scouts in the area. Coyotes usually stick to established routes, but lately we've seen them exploring new territory. Mind if I swing by later to take a look at what you found?" "Appreciate it. I'll be here." After hanging up, Frank moved to the gun safe disguised as a storage cabinet in his bedroom. The electronic lock recognized his fingerprint with a soft click. Inside, his firearms were arranged with military precision: Colt M4 carbine with tactical accessories, Remington 700 bolt-action rifle with scope, Mossberg 590A1 shotgun, and his sidearm of choice, a well-maintained Colt 1911.45 caliber, the same model he'd carried as an officer. He performed a function check on the 1911, loaded it, and holstered it under his shirt. The rest of the morning passed in routine farm maintenance, fixing a section of irrigation pipe, checking on his small herd of cattle, and tending to the vegetable garden Maria had started and he'd maintained since her passing. The physical labor helped quiet his mind, which kept returning to the surveillance he'd discovered. Sheriff's Deputy Bill Mercer arrived just after noon. Despite the title, Bill was effectively the law in this remote stretch of Cochise County. At 52, he was younger than Frank, but still one of the oldest deputies on the force. He'd served a single tour with the Marines before returning home to raise a family and join the sheriff's department. "Show me what you found," Bill said after they'd exchanged greetings. Frank led him to the western boundary and showed him the observation point. "Been seeing more of this lately," Bill confirmed, crouching to study the cigarette butts Frank had left in place. "Cartel activity is pushing into new areas. They're looking for routes, safe houses, weak spots. Any idea what particular outfit?" Bill glanced at him. "Getting specifics on cartels is Border Patrol's domain, but word is the Sinaloa faction under Vargas is moving in. They've been pressuring local ranchers, looking for cooperation." He stood, brushing dirt from his uniform pants. "You carrying these days, Frank?" "Started again this morning." Bill nodded. "Smart. Listen, I know you can handle yourself, but these aren't just street thugs. They're organized, well-armed, and completely ruthless. If you see anything else suspicious, call it in immediately. Don't engage." Frank nodded noncommittally, which drew a sigh from Bill. "I mean it, Frank. I remember the stories from the guys who served with you. I know what you're capable of, but you're not in the jungle with your ranger platoon anymore. These cartel soldiers don't fight fair, and they don't leave witnesses." "Understood," Frank said simply. "I'll call if there's trouble." After Bill left, Frank spent the afternoon implementing security precautions that had lain dormant in his mind for years. He checked the motion sensors he'd installed around the property perimeter after Maria died, replacing batteries and testing connections. He cleared fields of fire around the house and outbuildings. In the barn, he unlocked a footlocker containing equipment from his final deployment: a tactical vest, night vision monocular, and communications gear. As the sun began to set, Frank sat on his porch with a cup of coffee, watching shadows lengthen across his land. His mind drifted to another evening long ago, sitting on the edge of a jungle clearing in Vietnam, 19 years old and already responsible for the lives of other men. His platoon had been tasked with monitoring a suspected supply route along the Ho Chi Minh Trail. They'd set up an observation post and settled in for what was supposed to be a 3-day mission. On the second night, Frank had noticed something wrong with the pattern of insect sounds. Moments later, a North Vietnamese army patrol had appeared, moving directly toward their position. He'd silently alerted the platoon, and they'd melted into the jungle before being spotted. The ability to sense danger before it arrived had earned him the nickname Ghost among his fellow rangers. The memory faded as the desert sunset painted the sky in brilliant orange and purple. Frank sipped his coffee, now grown cold, and considered his situation with tactical precision. His property was too large to secure completely, but he could create choke points and early warning systems. The house itself was solid, built with adobe walls over a foot thick in some places. The barn and workshop could serve as fallback positions if necessary. In his mind, Frank began mapping out fields of fire, escape routes, and concealed observation points, old skills reawakening after years of dormancy. He'd need supplies, extra ammunition, food, water, first aid materials. Communications would be critical. Cell service was unreliable this far out. He made a mental note to dig out his old field radio and check if it still functioned. As darkness settled over the farm, Frank moved inside and secured the house for the night, another military habit that had never left him. Doors locked, windows checked, a chair wedged under the back door handle. He kept the 1911 on his bedside table and positioned the shotgun within reach. Sleep came in tactical intervals, 20 minutes awake, 40 minutes of light sleep, repeated through the night. By dawn, Frank had made his decision. If the cartels were moving into the area, they would eventually reach his farm. He would be prepared when they did. Over the next few days, Frank implemented his security plan. He drove into town for supplies, buying ammunition, batteries, and canned food without drawing attention. At the hardware store, he purchased motion-activated floodlights and additional locks. His actions were measured, methodical, drawing on decades of military planning. In the evenings, he maintained his weapons with practiced precision, field stripping and cleaning each one while the radio played softly in the background. Local news confirmed Bill's warning. Increased cartel activity across the county, intimidation of ranchers, and discovery of new smuggling routes. On Friday, Frank drove to the VFW hall for his monthly meetup with other veterans. The group had dwindled over the years as age and illness took their toll, but half a dozen regulars still gathered to share stories and remember comrades lost to time. "Heard there was trouble out your way," said Jim Conley, who'd served as a door gunner in Vietnam around the same time Frank had been there with the Rangers. "Nothing specific," Frank replied. "Just taking precautions." Mike Wheeler, who'd fought in Desert Storm, leaned forward. "My nephew's with Border Patrol. Says the cartels are getting bolder, pushing into areas they used to avoid. They're desperate for new routes since the main corridors are getting tighter enforcement." The conversation shifted to tactics, with each man offering suggestions based on his military experience. Jim had advice on perimeter security, Mike on communications. By the time they parted ways, Frank had several new ideas to incorporate into his plans. Driving home after dark, Frank noticed headlights following at a distance. The vehicle maintained the same gap for several miles, turning when he turned onto the county road that led to his property. Frank reduced his speed, watching in the rearview mirror as the following vehicle also slowed. Near the turnoff to his driveway, Frank suddenly accelerated, then cut his lights and pulled onto a service road hidden by mesquite trees. The following vehicle passed by, slowing as it approached his driveway. In the moonlight, Frank made out a dark SUV with tinted windows. It paused at his property entrance, then continued down the county road. Frank waited 15 minutes before proceeding home, taking an alternate route that approached his property from the east. He parked behind the barn rather than in his usual spot, entered the house through the back door, and moved through the darkened rooms with practiced silence. From a window, he observed his property for another hour before satisfying himself that no one had remained behind. Only then did he allow himself to relax marginally, though he kept the shotgun within reach as he settled in to clean his boots, another ritual from his military days. As he worked, Frank's mind returned to his final deployment, a classified operation in Central America targeting drug operations with ties to terrorist organizations. His team had been ambushed after their position was compromised by a local informant. 3 of his men had died in the initial firefight. Frank had led the survivors in a fighting retreat through dense jungle, evading capture for 6 days before extraction. The experience had taught him valuable lessons about fighting numerically superior forces on their home territory. Now, as he prepared for bed, Frank realized he was applying those same lessons to his own property. The irony wasn't lost on him. After decades of carrying the fight to distant enemies, he was preparing to defend his own land using the same tactical principles. That night, he dreamed of Maria. Not the Maria of their final years, weakened by cancer and medication, but the vibrant woman who had supported him through his military career, who had waited patiently during deployments and helped him adjust to civilian life after retirement. In the dream, she stood on their porch, watching the sunset as she often had in life. "They're coming, aren't they?" she asked without turning. "Yes," he answered, knowing somehow that she meant the cartel. "You'll do what needs to be done," she said. It wasn't a question. Frank woke before dawn, the dream still vivid in his mind. He moved through his morning routine with heightened awareness, checking and rechecking his security measures before beginning his daily run. This time, he varied his route, approaching his property boundaries from unexpected angles, studying the landscape with renewed tactical focus. As the sun rose fully, Frank stood on the small hill overlooking his farm. From this vantage point, he could see that his life had come full circle. He had spent his youth fighting in distant jungles and deserts, only to find the same conflict had followed him home in his old age. But this land was worth defending, not just the physical property, but what it represented. His family's legacy, his life with Maria, the peace he'd found here after decades of war. A week passed with no further incidents, lulling Frank into a cautious routine. Each morning, he checked the perimeter sensors he'd installed, finding nothing but occasional wildlife triggers. Each evening, he secured the property before sunset, maintaining his vigil from various observation points around the farm. The dark SUV hadn't returned, but Frank's instincts told him the threat hadn't passed. On Tuesday, Frank drove into town for supplies and information. His first stop was Garcia's Hardware, where Miguel Garcia had been supplying local ranchers for 3 decades. "Morning, Frank," Miguel called as the bell above the door announced his arrival. "What can I help you with today?" "Need some heavy-gauge fencing wire and a couple of those solar motion lights you got in last month," Frank replied, placing his list on the counter. Miguel gathered the items while making small talk about weather and local news. As Frank paid, Miguel leaned forward and lowered his voice. "Been meaning to ask if you've had any trouble out your way. Rodriguez's place got hit last week. 4 men in masks. Claimed to be looking for someone who crossed them. Tore the place apart. Took what little cash Carlos had." Frank kept his expression neutral. "No trouble so far. Rodriguez's place is what, 15 miles south of mine. About that. Sheriff says it's isolated, probably not related to the cartel activity everyone's talking about." Miguel's tone made it clear he didn't believe that assessment. Anyway, Carlos and his family moved in with his brother for now. Place is sitting empty. Frank nodded thoughtfully. "Good to know. I'll keep an eye out." His next stop was the county records office, where he requested property maps for the area surrounding his farm. The clerk, A young woman who didn't recognize him asked for identification and explanation. Research for water rights, Frank said, showing his driver's license. Looking at historical access patterns. 20 minutes later, he left with photocopies of survey maps showing property boundaries, access roads, and topographical features for a 5-mile radius around his land. The maps were public record, but Frank didn't want to draw attention to his interest. At the grocery store, Frank methodically filled his cart with shelf-stable foods, canned goods, rice, dried beans, and jerky. He added medical supplies to his purchases, bandages, antiseptic, pain relievers. Nothing suspicious about an old man stocking up, especially this far from town. As he loaded supplies into his truck, Frank noticed a black Escalade with tinted windows parked across the street. The vehicle hadn't been there when he entered the store. He deliberately took his time arranging bags in the truck bed, using the tailgate mirror to observe the Escalade without appearing to look directly at it. 2 men sat in the front seats, both wearing sunglasses despite the overcast day. Neither moved as Frank finished loading and returned his cart. Only when he pulled out of the parking lot did the Escalade's engine start. Instead of heading directly home, Frank drove to the sheriff's station. The Escalade didn't follow, confirming his suspicion that they knew his destination. Inside, he asked for Bill Mercer and was shown to the deputy's desk. "Twice in 2 weeks," Bill said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Must be important." Frank described the surveillance he'd observed, both at his property and in town. Bill's expression grew increasingly concerned. Rodriguez's place was definitely cartel-related. Bill confirmed after Frank mentioned what Miguel had told him. "We found their calling card, a scorpion carved into the kitchen table. Vargas Cartel's signature. They're moving through the area systematically, establishing control points for new smuggling routes." "Any pattern to which properties they're targeting?" Bill hesitated before pulling out a county map with several locations marked in red. "These are confirmed cartel incidents in the past month. Started south near the border, moving steadily north." He pointed to a location about 5 miles from Frank's farm. "This is the Rodriguez place. You're here." His finger moved to Frank's property. "You're directly in their path if they continue the pattern." Frank studied the map, memorizing the locations. "What are they looking for? Just smuggling routes or something else?" "Intelligence suggests they're establishing a network, safe houses, observation points, supply caches. Most of these properties weren't robbed so much as searched. They took cash and valuables when convenient, but that wasn't the primary objective." Bill leaned back in his chair. "Between us, we don't have the manpower to patrol effectively. Border Patrol is focused on the main corridors, and we're spread thin covering the entire county. So property owners are on their own," Frank said. It wasn't a question. Bill sighed. "I'm not supposed to say that, but essentially, yes. Best advice I can give is don't resist if they show up. Nothing on your property is worth dying for." Frank nodded without commenting. They both knew he wouldn't follow that advice. As he left the station, Frank circled the parking lot twice, confirming the Escalade was gone. He took an indirect route home, making random turns and doubling back occasionally to ensure he wasn't followed. The training from decades of covert operations returned easily, muscle memory activated by the familiar rush of adrenaline. Back at the farm, Frank unloaded his supplies and immediately set to work enhancing his security measures. He installed the solar motion lights at strategic points around the perimeter, angled to illuminate approach paths while keeping the house in shadow. He reinforced doors with additional deadbolts and planted wooden dowels and window tracks to prevent them from being forced open. In the barn, Frank cleared space in the hayloft and created a secondary observation post with line of sight to the main house and driveway. He positioned a waterproof container with emergency supplies, ammunition, first aid kit, water, and energy bars behind a false panel in the wall. As evening approached, Frank prepared dinner while listening to the local radio station. The news report included a brief mention of increased law enforcement presence in southern Cochise County due to border-related concerns, but provided no specifics. The deliberate vagueness confirmed Bill's assessment. Official channels were downplaying the threat to avoid panic. After eating, Frank moved to the secure room behind his pantry. The space was small but efficiently organized, with a gun safe, communication equipment, and survival gear. On the wall hung shadow boxes containing his medals and photographs from his military service. He removed his silver star and the photograph of his ranger platoon, securing them in a waterproof case that he then concealed in a floor compartment. If the cartel searched his house, they wouldn't find evidence of his military background. Frank spent the night in 4-hour rotations between sleep and surveillance. From the darkened window of his bedroom, then the kitchen, then the front room, he watched his property through the night vision monocular. Nothing moved except desert wildlife, a coyote trotting along the eastern fence line, owls hunting in the fields. At dawn, Frank performed his morning security check and found the first concrete evidence of intrusion. Fresh footprints circling the barn and approaching within 20 yards of the house before retreating. The prints showed a deliberate attempt to stay on hard ground where possible, but morning dew had softened the earth enough to capture partial impressions. 2 individuals, wearing military-style boots with distinctive tread patterns. Frank photographed the prints with his digital camera, then carefully erased them using a rake. He spent the morning installing early warning devices at strategic points around the property, tripwires connected to small bells hidden in brush, pressure plates buried under thin soil at gateway points, fishing lines strung with empty cans and dense mesquite thickets. Low-tech but effective, these methods had served him well in Vietnam when electronic surveillance wasn't available. In the afternoon, Frank drove to the county library to use their internet connection. His own satellite internet was too slow and unreliable for the research he needed to conduct. At a computer station in the back corner, with clear sightlines to all approaches, he searched for information on the Vargas cartel. News articles detailed their rise to power in Sinaloa, their expansion into Arizona, and their brutal methods of intimidation. Their leader, Eduardo Vargas, had started as a sicario, a hitman, before climbing the ranks through a combination of tactical intelligence and extreme violence. Under his leadership, the organization had developed a reputation for military-style operations rather than the chaotic violence of other cartels. Frank found a surveillance photo of Vargas accompanying an article about a failed DEA operation. The man was in his 40s, with close-cropped hair and the bearing of someone with military training. Frank memorized the face, then cleared his browsing history before leaving the library. On the drive home, Frank spotted a vehicle parked at the abandoned Rodriguez property, the same black Escalade he'd seen in town. He continued past without slowing, but mentally marked the location on his mental map. The cartel was establishing a presence at the abandoned ranch, just as Bill had suggested they might. That evening, Frank received a visit from Jim Conley, his fellow Vietnam veteran from the VFW. Jim's pickup truck announced itself with a distinctive rumble long before it reached the house, giving Frank time to secure sensitive items and assume his friendly old rancher persona. "Brought you some of Helen's apple pie," Jim said as Frank met him on the porch. She insisted. They sat in rocking chairs, eating pie and talking about inconsequential matters until Jim finally reached the purpose of his visit. "Mike's nephew with Border Patrol passed along some intel," he said quietly. "Cartel's been asking about properties in this area, especially ones owned by single occupants, elderly residents. Your name came up." Frank nodded, unsurprised. "Any timeline?" "Nothing specific. But Mike's nephew said they've been moving quickly, establishing control of an area within days once they start." Jim set down his empty plate. "Several of us from the VFW have been discussing options. Group defense might be more effective than each of us trying to secure our individual properties. Most of the VFW boys live in town," Frank pointed out. "True, but we could rotate shifts out at vulnerable properties. Create a network." Jim leaned forward. "Like the Strategic Hamlet program, except not a complete disaster this time." The reference to the failed Vietnam-era protective village strategy brought a rare smile to Frank's face. Appreciate the thought, but I'm not looking to draw anyone else into my fight. Jim studied him with the knowing look of someone who'd seen combat together. You've already gone to condition yellow, haven't you? Maybe even orange. The reference to combat readiness levels confirmed Jim had recognized the subtle signs of Frank's preparations. Just taking precautions. Bullshit, Jim said without heat. I know that look. Saw it enough times in the jungle. You're preparing for a fight. He sighed. At least let us set up a communication system. Daily check-ins. If you miss one, we come looking. Frank considered the offer. Having a backup plan made tactical sense. Agreed. Radio check at 0700 and 1900 hours. If I miss 2 consecutive checks, assume compromise. They spent the next hour establishing emergency protocols. Jim would coordinate with 4 other veterans who still maintained ham radio equipment. They would monitor a specific frequency at the designated times, using a simple code system to communicate status without revealing details. After Jim left, Frank completed his evening security routine with renewed focus. The conversation had crystallized the reality of his situation. The cartel's interest in his property wasn't speculative anymore. They were actively gathering intelligence, preparing for some type of operation. That night, one of the motion sensors at the northeast corner of his property triggered at 2:17 a.m. Frank was immediately awake, moving silently to the window with his night vision monocular. Through the green-tinted view, he spotted 2 figures moving cautiously along his fence line. They stopped periodically to study the house through binoculars, then continued their circuit of the property. Frank tracked their movement without intervention. This was reconnaissance, not an assault. The intruders were mapping his property, identifying security measures, establishing patterns. Standard procedure before an operation. By allowing them to complete their survey, he was gathering intelligence of his own, their approach vectors, their level of training, their equipment. The men completed a full circuit of the property without attempting to breach the perimeter, then disappeared into the darkness to the south. Frank remained at the window for another hour, ensuring they had truly departed. Then he systematically adjusted his defensive preparations based on what he'd observed. They had spotted some of his obvious security measures, the motion lights, the reinforced doors. But they had missed the pressure plates, the tripwires, and the observation post in the barn. At dawn, Frank found where they had cut his fence on the south side, creating an access point that wouldn't be visible from the house. Instead of repairing it immediately, he installed a hidden trail camera overlooking the breach. When they returned, he would have photographs of their faces. The radio check with Jim at 0700 went as planned. Frank reported the night's activity using their agreed-upon code. Had 2 coyotes checking the henhouse last night. No harm done, but might need to reinforce the coop. Throughout the day, Frank made visible preparations that would be expected of someone who discovered a security breach, mending the fence in plain sight, adding a padlock to the barn door, walking his property with a shotgun slung over his shoulder. Meanwhile, he concealed more sophisticated countermeasures, pressure-sensitive alarm triggers under the soil at entry points, fishing lines strung with small bells in the brush approach paths, reflective tacks placed in trees that would catch light from his IR illuminator at night. In the afternoon, Frank drove to the edge of his property and hiked into the hills overlooking the abandoned Rodriguez Ranch. From a concealed position, he observed the property through binoculars. The black Escalade was gone, replaced by 2 pickup trucks and a Jeep Cherokee. Men moved between buildings with the coordinated efficiency of military training. Frank counted 6 individuals, all armed with handguns visible in belt holsters. Equipment was being unloaded from the vehicles, boxes and duffel bags carried into the main house. Frank shifted position to get a better angle on the house windows. Inside, he could see what appeared to be communication equipment being set up. A man in a dark blue button-down shirt directed the operation, pointing to locations where items should be placed. Though Frank couldn't see his face clearly, the man's bearing and the deference shown by the others marked him as a leader. After 2 hours of observation, Frank had confirmed his suspicion. The cartel was establishing a command post at the Rodriguez property. Their presence this close to his farm wasn't coincidental. Whatever operation they were planning, his property was likely involved. Frank retreated carefully, leaving no sign of his presence. Back at his truck, he found a note tucked under the windshield wiper, a single playing card, the ace of spades with a scorpion drawn on it in black marker. The cartel's calling card, left to send a message. They knew he was watching them. Instead of returning directly home, Frank drove to a different vantage point several miles away. Using powerful binoculars, he observed his own property from a distance. Nothing appeared disturbed, but the message was clear. Both sides were conducting surveillance now, the first moves in a tactical chess game. When Frank finally returned home, he approached cautiously, circling the property to check for signs of intrusion before entering. Inside, he immediately sensed something was wrong. Nothing was visibly disturbed, but the air felt different. Someone had been there in his absence. A methodical search revealed subtle evidence of intrusion. A window latch slightly misaligned, floor dust patterns showing where someone had moved carefully through the house. In his bedroom, the intruder had examined his belongings, leaving a drawer fractionally open. The gun safe appeared untouched, its electronic lock showing no attempt at entry. Frank checked his most sensitive hiding spots: the floor compartment in the secure room, the cache in the barn, the weapons concealed in furniture throughout the house. All remained untouched. The intruder had conducted a basic search, but lacked either the time or expertise for a more thorough investigation. The evening radio check with Jim became more significant now. Had a visitor while I was out today. Didn't take anything, just looking around. Might need to improve my locks. Jim's response came quickly. Understood. Want some help with those locks tomorrow? Negative. Handling it myself for now. Will advise if situation changes. After the call, Frank set up additional interior security measures, a hair placed across the door frame, a pencil balanced precariously on a shelf that would fall if someone passed nearby, talcum powder dusted on strategic surfaces that would reveal footprints. These techniques had served him well during his time with long-range reconnaissance patrols, when detecting enemy movement could mean the difference between life and death. That night, Frank maintained full vigilance, moving between observation points every 30 minutes to avoid developing patterns. The property remained quiet until just before dawn, when the trail camera at the fence breach captured images of 2 men entering his property. They moved with military precision, using hand signals to coordinate their approach toward the house. Frank tracked them through his night vision binocular as they carefully navigated around his visible security measures. When they reached the first pressure plate, one man stopped abruptly, hand raised in warning. He knelt, examining the ground, then pointed out the subtle disturbance in the soil. They detoured around the trigger, unaware that their new path led them directly into a tripwire. The soft jingle of bells froze both men in place. After a moment of tense stillness, they retreated, moving back toward the fence breach. Frank allowed them to leave, gathering valuable intelligence about their tactics and level of training. They were skilled, professionals with tactical experience, but they weren't special forces quality. Their caution indicated they were still in the information-gathering phase, not yet ready for direct confrontation. At the 0700 radio check, Frank provided a coded update. More coyotes overnight. Getting bolder, but still just testing the fences. Want me to bring my dogs by? Jim asked, offering combat support. Negative. Still manageable. We'll advise if pack size increases. After the call, Frank spent the morning enhancing his defensive preparations. He constructed improvised early warning devices from materials around the farm: tin cans with pebbles strung on fishing line, glass bottles positioned to break if disturbed, reflective metal pieces hung to catch flashlight beams. In the Vietnam jungle, he had learned to use the environment itself as a weapon and a shield. The same principles applied here: adapted to desert terrain. In the afternoon, Frank received another visitor, Bill Mercer's patrol car pulling up the driveway without prior notice. Frank met him on the porch, deliberately leaving his shotgun visible through the open door. "Thought I should check in," Bill said, his expression revealing concern. "Got reports of suspicious activity out this way last night." "Nothing specific here," Frank replied, the partial truth coming easily. "Heard some coyotes near dawn, but that's normal." Bill's gaze traveled over the visible security improvements around the property. "You've been busy. Just routine maintenance." "Frank," Bill's voice lowered, "we got confirmation that Vargas himself is in the area. DEA has been tracking him since he crossed the border 3 days ago. Whatever they're planning, it's big enough to bring the boss in personally." Frank absorbed this information without visible reaction. "Any idea what they're after?" "Not specifically, but they've established a presence at the Rodriguez place." Bill hesitated. "There's something else you should know. Before they abandoned the place, the Rodriguez family had agreed to sell their property to a development company. Turns out the company is a shell corporation linked to Vargas. They're buying up land in this corridor, creating a network of cartel-controlled properties. And my place is in the middle of that corridor," Frank concluded. Bill nodded. "Your property is strategically located. Good elevation, clear sightlines, access to the county road, but enough isolation for privacy. Perfect for their purposes." He paused. "Have they approached you yet? Made any offers?" "Not directly." Frank described finding evidence of surveillance and intrusion, but omitted details about his countermeasures and observations. "We've requested additional resources from Border Patrol and State Police," Bill said. "But honestly, I don't expect much help to arrive in time. This area is too remote, and Vargas moves quickly." He met Frank's gaze directly. "If they approach you, take the offer. Whatever they're paying, it's not worth your life." Frank nodded without commitment. "I'll keep that in mind." After Bill left, Frank moved to the secure room and retrieved his satellite phone, a precaution from his final years of service that he'd maintained with private funds after retirement. The device connected to military satellites, providing communication even when cellular networks were compromised. Frank dialed a number from memory, connecting to a former teammate now working with a private security contractor. "Whisper Actual," Frank said when the call connected, using their old operational call sign. A pause, then, "Ghost? Is that really you?" The voice belonged to David Martinez, who had served under Frank in 3 deployments. "Affirmative. Need intel on Eduardo Vargas, Sinaloa cartel operations in Arizona." Martinez didn't waste time with questions. "Vargas is former Mexican Special Forces, trained by our people before going private. His security team includes at least 4 others with military background. They're expanding aggressively into Cochise County, establishing a new smuggling corridor." A pause. "Why are you asking about Vargas, Ghost?" "He's taken an interest in my retirement property." A longer pause. "Shit. You need extraction?" "Negative. Just information for now. Hold for upload." The line went silent for 30 seconds. "Sending you what we have. It's not officially sanctioned, understand?" "Understood. Appreciate it." "Ghost, these aren't amateur thugs. Vargas runs his operation like a military campaign. If he wants your property, he'll come with overwhelming force." "I've faced worse odds," Frank replied evenly. "That was 30 years ago, with Ranger support and air assets," Martinez countered. "Just be careful, old man." "Always am." After the call ended, Frank checked the secure email address associated with the phone. Martinez had sent detailed intelligence on Vargas's organization, personnel profiles, tactical assessments, recent operation patterns. The information confirmed Frank's observations and Bill's warnings while adding critical details about Vargas's methodology. According to the files, Vargas typically began with surveillance and intelligence gathering, followed by a personal visit to make an offer significantly above market value. For those who refused, intimidation escalated systematically, property damage, threats to family members, and finally direct violence. The entire process usually took less than a week from initial contact to resolution. The intelligence included photographs of Vargas's security team, the same men Frank had observed at the Rodriguez property. Their profiles indicated military backgrounds with specialized training in tactical operations. They weren't cartel thugs, they were professional soldiers working for cartel money. As evening approached, Frank prepared for what tactical assessment suggested would be the next phase: direct contact. Vargas had established a presence, conducted surveillance, and tested security. Logic dictated that a formal approach would follow, likely within the next 24 hours. Frank set the radio for his evening check with Jim, but before the scheduled time, he noticed headlights approaching his driveway, two vehicles moving slowly with their lights dimmed. The cartel had arrived earlier than expected, abandoning the methodical approach detailed in Martinez's intelligence. Something had accelerated their timeline. Frank quickly radioed Jim using their emergency protocol. Coyote pack at the henhouse. Implementing Scarecrow protocol. Then he moved to implement the defensive plan he'd been preparing since the first signs of surveillance. The game of chess had entered its next phase. Frank moved with practiced efficiency, implementing defensive protocols developed through decades of combat experience. Within 30 seconds, he had retrieved his M4 carbine from the living room hidden compartment, attached his tactical vest, and positioned himself at the reinforced window overlooking the driveway. Through his night vision monocular, he identified two vehicles, the black Escalade he'd observed previously, followed by a pickup truck with 4 men in the bed, all carrying assault rifles. The vehicles stopped 50 yards from the house, positioning themselves to illuminate the front porch with their headlights while keeping the occupants in shadow. A tactical approach designed to disorient the defender while protecting the assault force. Professional methodology that confirmed Frank's intelligence assessment. From the Escalade emerged 3 figures. The center man, walking with the confident posture of authority, matched the photographs Frank had studied: Eduardo Vargas. Flanking him were 2 security personnel, hands resting near holstered weapons, but not yet drawn. From the pickup, the armed men spread out in standard security formation, establishing a perimeter. Frank assessed the tactical situation with cold precision. 7 visible hostiles, likely more in reserve. Multiple firearms, probable body armor based on subtle bulges under their clothing. Disciplined spacing and movement indicating professional training. This wasn't a casual intimidation visit. They had come prepared for resistance. Instead of retreating to a more defensible position, Frank made a calculated decision. He unloaded and secured his M4, then moved to the porch with only his concealed 1911 pistol. The unexpected response would disrupt their tactical plan and might reveal valuable intelligence about their intentions and capabilities. Standing in the doorway of his home, Frank called out in a steady voice, "Private property. State your business." Vargas stepped forward into the headlight beams, hands visible at his sides in a show of non-aggression. "Senor Harmon, I am Eduardo Vargas. I'd like to speak with you about a business proposition." His English carried only a slight accent, confirming his educated background. "It's after hours for business calls," Frank replied evenly. "You can come back tomorrow during daylight." Vargas smiled without warmth. "I'm afraid my schedule is quite tight. This will only take a few minutes of your time." He gestured to the porch. "May we speak?" Frank maintained his position, analyzing variables and calculating response options. Direct confrontation with 7 armed men offered poor survival odds. Engagement under negotiation pretense provided intelligence gathering opportunity and potential for de-escalation. "You and 1 associate," Frank said finally. "The rest stay with the vehicles." Vargas nodded to one of his guards, then spoke quietly to the others, who maintained their positions as Vargas and a single guard approached the porch. Frank noticed the guard scanning the property with the systematic efficiency of military training, cataloging potential threats and tactical positions. "Thank you for your time, Senor Harmon," Vargas said as he reached the steps. "May we sit? I find business discussions more productive when comfortable. Frank gestured to the porch chairs, positioning himself with clear sight lines to both Vargas and the vehicles beyond. The guard remained standing at the edge of the porch, hand resting casually near his concealed weapon. "I'll be direct," Vargas began. "I represent investors interested in acquiring properties in this region for agricultural development. Your farm has been identified as particularly suitable for our needs. We're prepared to offer substantial compensation, 3 times the current market value." Frank studied the cartel leader with the same detached assessment he'd once used on enemy commanders. Vargas projected calculated calm with undertones of absolute confidence. His hands, manicured but strong, remained visible on the chair armrests, a deliberate display of non-threatening intent contradicted by the armed personnel surrounding the property. "Not interested in selling," Frank said simply. "This land has been in my family for generations." Vargas nodded, as if expecting this response. "I understand family legacy carries significant emotional value. Perhaps 4 times market rate would help balance that consideration. It would provide you financial security to relocate to more comfortable surroundings, perhaps a nice coastal property for your retirement years." "Money's not the issue," Frank replied. "This is my home. Not looking to move." A subtle shift in Vargas's expression revealed the first hint of irritation beneath his polished exterior. "Mr. Harmon, I should be transparent. Our development plans for this region are proceeding regardless of individual property decisions. Those who partner with us early receive premium compensation. Those who delay." He spread his hands in a regretful gesture. "The terms become less favorable." The implied threat hung in the air between them. Frank had heard similar intimidation tactics in various languages across multiple continents. The script might change, but the underlying message remained consistent: comply or suffer consequences. "Appreciate your offer," Frank said, his voice betraying nothing of his tactical calculations. "But my decision is final. Not selling." Vargas studied him with renewed interest, as if seeing him clearly for the first time. "You're not what I expected, Mr. Harmon. Most men your age show more concern for their personal safety when faced with changing circumstances." Frank met his gaze directly. "I found that at my age, principles become more important than circumstances." Something in Frank's demeanor caused Vargas to tilt his head slightly, reassessing. The guard shifted position, sensing the change in atmosphere. For several seconds, silence stretched between them as Vargas conducted his own tactical evaluation. "You have military background," Vargas stated rather than asked. "Your posture, your situational awareness. You're not an ordinary farmer." Frank maintained his neutral expression. "Served my country, like many men my age." Vargas nodded slowly. "As did I, though for a different flag. Mexican Special Forces, before entering the private sector." He leaned forward slightly. "Professional courtesy, then, from one soldier to another. This region is being repurposed for our operations. Your property sits at a strategic location we require. While I respect your attachment to your land, business necessities prevail." "Your business isn't my concern," Frank replied. "It should be," Vargas countered smoothly. "We're establishing infrastructure throughout this corridor. Transportation, security, distribution, all requiring specific territorial control. Your cooperation would be generously rewarded. Your resistance would be problematic." Frank recognized the conversation had shifted from persuasion to explicit threat. Vargas was following his established pattern: offer, then intimidation, with violence as the implied next step. The tactical situation remained unchanged: 7 visible hostiles with superior firepower but vulnerable positioning. Frank's defensive preparations remained uncompromised, but engaging now would forfeit strategic advantage. "I'll need time to consider your offer," Frank said, a calculated response to gain tactical delay. Vargas's expression reflected satisfaction at this apparent concession. "A reasonable request. You have until tomorrow evening to reach your decision." He stood, adjusting his jacket with practiced elegance. For your consideration, our offer is now 5 times market value. My final revision. My associate will leave contact information. The guard produced a business card, placing it on the small table between the chairs. Vargas extended his hand, a gesture of formal business etiquette at odds with the reality of their interaction. Frank stood but didn't accept the handshake. I'll contact you with my decision. Vargas lowered his hand, a flicker of annoyance crossing his features. Until tomorrow, then. Though I should mention, our agricultural development sometimes requires soil testing and boundary verification. You may notice our technical personnel on adjacent properties conducting preliminary assessments. Standard procedure. The warning was clear: surveillance would continue, perhaps escalate. Frank nodded once in acknowledgement, maintaining his position as Vargas and his guard returned to their vehicles. The cartel convoy departed with deliberate slowness, headlights sweeping across the property in a final display of intimidation. Once the vehicles disappeared down the county road, Frank immediately moved to implement his contingency protocols. The encounter had followed predictable patterns, confirming that Vargas operated by established methodology. This offered tactical advantage. Predictable opponents made strategic countermeasures more effective. Frank retrieved his M4 and conducted a perimeter check, confirming no personnel had been left behind during the encounter. At the prearranged time, he made radio contact with Jim. Scarecrow protocol suspended. Visitors departed after initial contact. Expect escalation within 24 hours. Acknowledged, Jim responded. Assets available if needed. Negative. Maintain distance and communication protocols only. Frank wouldn't risk civilian lives, even those with military experience, against cartel professionals. Frank spent the next 2 hours reinforcing his defensive positions. He moved essential supplies to his fallback locations, the reinforced storm cellar behind the barn, the hunting blind in the eastern tree line, the ridge overlook with its natural rock formation providing cover and concealment. At each position, he cached ammunition, water, and medical supplies. In the secure room, Frank retrieved his tactical communications gear and established redundant contact protocols with Jim's veteran network. If standard communication failed, alternates were in place. Light signals visible from specific vantage points, relocated objects in predetermined locations visible with binoculars from safe distance. As he worked, Frank's mind automatically processed tactical scenarios. Vargas had revealed key intelligence during their conversation. Confirmation of military background, operational methodology, and strategic objectives. The cartel needed his property specifically, rather than simply establishing general territorial control. This suggested particular geographic requirements for their smuggling infrastructure. By dawn, Frank had completed preparation of his immediate defensive perimeter. The tactical situation remained disadvantageous in terms of personnel numbers and firepower, but he had established countermeasures leveraging his knowledge of the terrain and extensive combat experience. The sun had barely cleared the horizon when Frank spotted movement at his southern property boundary, 3 men with surveying equipment moving along his fence line. Vargas's technical personnel establishing positions under the guise of innocent land assessment. Through his binoculars, Frank observed their methodical placement of small objects at regular intervals, not surveying equipment, but monitoring devices designed to track movement across his property. Instead of confronting them, Frank documented their positions and activities from concealment. The pattern of placement revealed their surveillance priorities: approaches to the house, access routes to the county road, potential concealment locations within his property boundaries. The information would prove valuable when contact escalated to conflict. By mid-morning, the survey team had departed, leaving behind their electronic monitoring network. Frank waited until they were clearly gone before moving to selected devices and subtly adjusting their positioning. Not enough to reveal tampering, but sufficient to create blind spots in their surveillance coverage. Veteran rangers had employed similar countermeasures against enemy trail monitoring during Vietnam operations. At noon, Frank received an unexpected visit from Bill Mercer. The deputy's patrol car kicked up dust as it approached the house with greater speed than normal, suggesting urgency. "Thought you should know," Bill said without preamble as he exited his vehicle. Rodriguez's place was completely cleared out this morning. All equipment, personnel gone. Something's happening. Frank absorbed this intelligence without revealing his night encounter. Any indication where they relocated? Bill shook his head. Nothing concrete. But County Dispatch reported increased traffic on the access road to the Whitman property about 3 miles west of here. Been abandoned since Old Man Whitman died last year. The information aligned with tactical assessment. Vargas was consolidating forces in preparation for his next move. The sudden withdrawal from Rodriguez's property suggested operational phase transition rather than strategic retreat. Anything else unusual in the area? Frank asked. Road maintenance crew showed up on the county road half a mile north of your turnoff. Never seen county workers respond that quickly to anything. Bill's expression conveyed his suspicion. Pretty sure they're not actual road workers. Appreciate the information, Frank said, deliberately maintaining his role as concerned citizen rather than revealing his tactical assessment. Bill hesitated before adding, "Frank, I've got a bad feeling about this. Whatever they're planning, it's moving fast. I've requested state police backup, but bureaucracy moves slow." He glanced around the property, noting the subtle defensive preparations visible to his trained eye. "You need to consider leaving, just until this blows over." "Can't do that, Bill," Frank replied simply. The deputy sighed. "Figured you'd say that. Look, I have to maintain official position. Don't engage. Call for assistance if threatened." Unofficially, he lowered his voice. "Jim Conley contacted me. Said you might need additional support, given your history together." Frank evaluated the implications. Jim was activating their veteran network more broadly than authorized, potentially compromising operational security. Yet additional assets could prove valuable if tactical situation deteriorated further. "Tell Jim to maintain communication protocols only," Frank instructed. "No direct intervention without explicit request." Bill nodded. "Understood. I'll be patrolling this area regularly for the next 24 hours. Radio Channel 3 is monitored continuously at the station." After Bill departed, Frank continued methodical preparation while maintaining awareness of surveillance. The cartel's monitoring devices required careful movement patterns to exploit identified blind spots. By mid-afternoon, Frank had completed his defensive preparations without revealing critical positions or capabilities to watching eyes. At 4 o'clock, Frank received a phone call from the number on Vargas's business card. He allowed it to ring 4 times before answering. A small psychological maneuver to establish independence rather than eager compliance. "Mr. Harmon." Vargas's voice carried the same controlled confidence as during their face-to-face meeting. "I trust you've had sufficient time to consider our generous offer." "I have," Frank replied. "My answer remains the same. Not selling." A brief silence followed before Vargas continued. His tone hardened. "I'm disappointed by your intransigence. Perhaps you misunderstood the nature of our discussion. This isn't a negotiation between equals. It's merely a courtesy extended due to professional respect." "I understand perfectly," Frank countered. "You want my land. I'm not selling. Nothing complicated about it." "On the contrary," Vargas replied, "the situation is becoming unnecessarily complex. My organization has invested significantly in regional infrastructure development. Your property represents a small but critical component of our overall operation. Your cooperation was requested as a professional courtesy. Your obstruction will be addressed with professional consequences." The threat required no elaboration. Frank had anticipated this progression since first detecting cartel surveillance of his property. The conversation now served only to confirm timeline and intention. "Is that all?" Frank asked, deliberately projecting disinterest rather than defiance. "For now," Vargas answered, "though I suspect we'll continue our discussion soon under less favorable circumstances." "A final opportunity, Mr. Harmon. Reconsider your position." Contact me by sundown with your acceptance, and previous terms remain available. Don't expect a call, Frank said before ending the conversation. The tactical countdown had begun. Based on established cartel methodology, Frank estimated armed response within 2 to 4 hours, sufficient time for Vargas to mobilize personnel while allowing minimal preparation for defense. The timing would likely target early evening transition, when failing light created visual disadvantage for defenders while providing cover for attacking forces. Frank implemented his final defensive preparations. He moved his primary weapon cache to the storm cellar, including his M4, the Remington sniper rifle, additional ammunition, and combat accessories. He positioned improvised early warning devices at calculated intervals covering likely approach vectors. He established his personal equipment for maximum mobility: tactical vest with ammunition and essential supplies, secure communication device, night vision capability. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Frank initiated final communication with his support network. Scarecrow protocol active. Maintain communication blackout until all clear signal. Emergency protocols established per previous arrangement. Jim's acknowledgement came immediately. Understood. Assets staged at predetermined locations. Will monitor emergency frequencies. Frank knew assets staged meant Jim and other veterans had positioned themselves at observation points outside the immediate conflict zone, ready to report cartel movements to authorities and provide emergency support if required. He hadn't authorized this escalation, but recognized the tactical value of additional surveillance coverage. At 6:42 p.m., as sunset painted the desert landscape in deepening orange and red hues, Frank's perimeter sensors detected the first movement. Vehicles approaching from multiple directions. Not just the expected escalade and pickup, but a coordinated approach from 3 vectors. Through his binoculars, Frank counted 5 vehicles total: the Escalade, 2 pickups with personnel in the beds, and 2 SUVs. Conservative estimate placed total hostile force at 15 to 20 personnel. The tactical situation had deteriorated beyond initial assessment. Vargas had escalated directly to overwhelming force rather than progressive intimidation. This deviation from established methodology suggested personal involvement in operational planning, the cartel leader taking direct control rather than following standard procedure. Frank initiated his contingency protocol for superior force engagement. Direct confrontation would result in certain defeat. Asymmetric response offered only viable option: channeling attackers into prepared positions, exploiting terrain advantages, and employing guerrilla tactics developed during his special operations training. The approaching vehicles stopped approximately 200 yards from the house, forming a loose semicircle that blocked direct escape routes while maintaining tactical spacing. Personnel deployed in standard formation, establishing perimeter control while command elements remained protected within vehicles. Through his night vision monocular, Frank observed Vargas emerging from the Escalade, accompanied by 4 security personnel. The cartel leader surveyed the property with calculated assessment, then issued instructions to his team leaders. The operation was unfolding with military precision. Personnel established sectors of fire, communications equipment deployed, tactical positions secured. Frank had anticipated this approach. His defensive preparation had focused on creating an impression of conventional resistance while establishing unconventional response capability. The visible security measures, reinforced doors, window protection, external lighting, would channel attacking forces toward expected resistance points, away from his actual defensive positions. The attack began at 7:17 p.m. with a calculated demonstration of force. 2 armored vehicles accelerated toward the house, stopping 30 yards from the porch. Armed personnel emerged, establishing covering positions while a designated speaker called out through a bullhorn. "Franklin Harmon, this property is now under our control by order of regional authority. Exit the house with hands visible. You have 60 seconds to comply before we implement clearance protocols." The ultimatum was standard military psychological procedure, designed to prompt surrender from isolated defenders facing superior force. Frank had employed similar tactics during hostage extraction operations. He provided no response, allowing the attacking force to progress through their standard escalation pattern while revealing operational methodology. After the 60-second deadline passed, the tactical team initiated their breach procedure. 2 men approached the front entrance while 4 others maintained covering positions. The lead operator examined the door, communicating with hand signals to indicate reinforcement. A third team member approached with breaching equipment, a compact battering ram designed for tactical entry. Frank observed from his concealed position in the storm cellar, monitoring through the remote camera system he'd installed during preparatory phase. The attackers were following predictable entry protocols, focusing on primary access points while maintaining perimeter security. Their tactical discipline confirmed Vargas's military background. These weren't undisciplined cartel thugs, but trained operators executing established procedures. The front door splintered under the third impact of the breaching ram. Entry team personnel moved through the opening with coordinated efficiency, weapons at ready position, employing standard room-clearing technique. Frank continued observation as they methodically searched the house, room by room, maintaining tactical communication throughout. Their confusion became evident as they completed the search without locating their target. The team leader reported to Vargas, who had remained in protected position near the vehicles. Through the directional microphone Frank had positioned, he captured fragments of their communication. Empty, no occupant. Checkout buildings. Could have fled before arrival. Vargas's response carried the irritation of disrupted planning. He's here. The property is monitored. Expand search to all structures. Find him. The tactical teams regrouped and expanded their search pattern to include the barn, workshop, and storage shed. Frank continued observation, calculating timing for his counter-response. The attacking force had committed to standard search procedure, dividing their superior numbers into smaller teams, focusing on individual structures. This created tactical vulnerability. Isolated units could be engaged separately rather than confronting consolidated force. Frank's Vietnam experience had taught him the critical advantage of initiative in asymmetric engagement. Allowing the enemy to execute their plan surrendered that advantage. When the search team entered the barn, he initiated his response sequence. The first phase wasn't an attack, but a psychological destabilization. Frank remotely triggered the prepared devices he'd positioned throughout the property. Simultaneous activation of emergency generators powering floodlights in unexpected locations, recorded sounds played through concealed speakers, and controlled electrical failures in structures currently being searched. The disorientation effect was immediate. Search teams reacted with combat reflexes, shifting to defensive postures and communicating urgent status reports. The tactical confusion created operational pause, the crucial interval between stimulus and organized response that Frank had exploited throughout his combat career. During this interval, Frank executed his first direct action. From his concealed position, he remotely triggered the prepared devices in the parked vehicles. Signal jammers disrupting radio communication, smoke canisters creating visual obstruction, and focused directional speakers broadcasting recorded gunfire sounds to simulate attack from multiple vectors. The combination of sensory disruption and communication interference fractured the attacking force's coordinated operation. Team members responded to perceived threats in different directions, breaking formation and compromising tactical integrity. Vargas could be heard shouting commands, attempting to restore operational control against the engineered chaos. Frank seized the created opportunity to reposition from the storm cellar to his secondary location in the eastern tree line. Moving through prepared pathways that avoided the cartel's monitoring devices, he established position with optimal observation of the compromised attacking force, while maintaining multiple escape routes. From this position, Frank initiated the next phase, targeted response against command elements. Using his Remington rifle with suppressor attachment, he fired precisely aimed shots at communications equipment, vehicle tires, and exposed tactical lighting. Each shot was calculated to disable equipment rather than personnel, maintaining tactical advantage while minimizing escalation to lethal force. The effect was cumulative disruption. Without communications, the separated teams couldn't coordinate response. Without vehicle mobility, their extraction capability was compromised. Without tactical lighting, their night operations capability was degraded. The sophisticated attacking force was being systematically reduced to isolated personnel operating in unfamiliar territory against an unseen defender. Vargas's tactical experience was evident in his response. Rather than allowing continued degradation, he ordered immediate consolidation. All personnel returning to central position, establishing defensive perimeter, restoring tactical integrity. The standard military response to ambush situation executed with professional discipline. Frank had anticipated this reaction. The consolidation brought the attacking force into proximity with his prepared secondary devices. Pressure-triggered noise generators that activated as personnel crossed designated pathways. The sudden activation from multiple directions created impression of coordinated counterassault, prompting defensive response against non-existent attackers. Through his night vision, Frank observed Vargas's growing frustration as tactical control deteriorated. The cartel leader had expected routine intimidation operation against an elderly civilian. Instead, he faced sophisticated counter-tactics, disrupting his force without presenting target for direct response. Professional pride was becoming factor in operational judgment. Vargas's military background creating personal investment in tactical outcome. Frank recognized the psychological leverage point. He initiated direct communication using the radio frequency he'd identified during surveillance of cartel operations. "Vargas," he transmitted, "your men are exposed in disadvantageous terrain against prepared defensive positions. Withdraw now while extraction remains viable." The response was immediate, Vargas ordering personnel to locate transmission source, redirecting focus from consolidation to counterintelligence operation. Frank had already repositioned, moving to tertiary location with different communication equipment, maintaining initiative while exploiting enemy reaction patterns. For 20 minutes, Frank continued asymmetric engagement, triggering prepared devices, executing precise disabling shots against equipment, and periodic communications creating impression of multiple defenders. The cartel force maintained defensive position while attempting to locate and engage their unseen opponent, frustration evident in increasingly urgent radio transmissions. Frank observed Vargas consulting with his security team, tactical options visibly diminishing as night deepened and operational control deteriorated. The cartel leader finally made the decision Frank had calculated toward: temporary tactical withdrawal to re-establish advantage. "All units, stage withdrawal to secondary position," Vargas ordered. "Maintain defensive coverage during extraction." The cartel forces began coordinated withdrawal toward their functional vehicles, maintaining tactical discipline despite the operational setback. Frank allowed the extraction to proceed without interference, calculating that forced engagement during withdrawal would escalate to lethal exchange without strategic advantage. As the vehicles departed, Frank maintained observation from concealed position, verifying complete extraction without personnel remaining behind. Vargas's final radio transmission confirmed tactical assessment. "We'll return with appropriate response." This isn't finished. When the property had been clear for 30 minutes, Frank conducted methodical sweep, confirming no surveillance devices or personnel had been left behind. Only then did he return to the damaged house, surveying the effects of the cartel's search operation. Furniture overturned, doors broken, personal belongings scattered across floors, standard intimidation tactics executed during property search. Frank proceeded to the secure room, finding it undiscovered behind its concealed entrance. Inside, he activated emergency communication protocol with his support network. Initial contact concluded. Enemy forces withdrawn after unsuccessful engagement. Expect escalated response within 12 to 24 hours. Jim's response came immediately. Assessment of situation? Professional opposition with military tactics. Approximately 15 to 20 personnel with modern equipment. Directed by Vargas personally. Frank paused before adding critical assessment. This is military operation using cartel resources, not standard criminal intimidation. Escalation will involve increased personnel and equipment, possibly including specialized weapons. Understood, Jim replied. Local assets insufficient for encounter of that scale. Recommend relocation to defensive position with additional support capability. Negative, Frank responded. Tactical advantage remains with defender in familiar territory. Withdrawal surrenders that advantage without strategic benefit. The decision wasn't bravado but calculated assessment from decades of combat experience. Vargas had revealed his operational approach, conventional military tactics applied with cartel resources. Such methodology held inherent vulnerabilities against unconventional response by defender with special operations background and intimate knowledge of terrain. Frank spent the night re-establishing defensive positions, adjusting for intelligence gathered during initial engagement. He cataloged equipment losses. The house was compromised as defensive position, several external cameras disabled, perimeter sensors damaged. Against these losses, he balanced intelligence gains, confirmation of enemy tactical patterns, exposed communication frequencies, demonstrated response protocols to specific situations. As dawn approached, Frank positioned himself at the observation post overlooking the county road, monitoring for indications of renewed cartel activity. His tactical assessment projected minimum 12 hours for Vargas to regroup and develop adjusted operational plan. This provided critical preparation interval for defensive reconfiguration. The morning passed with methodical preparation. Frank's tactical assessment anticipated Vargas's next move, escalation to overwhelming force with specialized equipment. Standard military doctrine when initial operation failed against unexpected resistance. Having revealed his defensive capabilities, Frank now needed to adjust strategy for secondary engagement against informed opposition. At the Ridge observation post, Frank detected the first indicators of renewed cartel activity at 10:17 a.m., vehicle movement on access roads approaching from multiple directions, maintaining communication discipline with no radio traffic. Through high-powered binoculars, he identified tactical vehicles with reinforced frames and ballistic protection, professional equipment beyond standard cartel resources. Frank documented approach vectors and composition of forces. 3 SUVs with tactical modifications, 2 pickup trucks with mounted equipment in beds, and an unmarked van likely containing specialized gear. Conservative estimate placed personnel count at 25 to 30, significantly increased from initial engagement. The tactical situation had deteriorated as expected, requiring adjustment to asymmetric response planning. Instead of returning to the farmhouse, Frank relocated to his primary fallback position, the reinforced storm cellar accessed through concealed entrance behind the barn. The underground space contained his critical supplies, weapons, ammunition, communication equipment, medical kit, and provisions for extended operations. From this position, he could monitor property through concealed camera network while maintaining escape routes to secondary positions. At 11:42 a.m., cartel forces established perimeter control around the property, positioning personnel at strategic points to prevent undetected movement. Their tactical deployment demonstrated professional methodology, overlapping fields of fire, communication redundancy, and specialized team assignments visible in their positioning. Vargas had clearly adjusted approach based on previous engagement, implementing counterinsurgency tactics rather than standard intimidation protocols. Through the camera network, Frank observed specialized equipment being unloaded from the unmarked van, thermal imaging devices, signal detection equipment, and what appeared to be tactical drones for aerial surveillance. The cartel had escalated to military-grade technology, confirming Frank's assessment of Vargas's background and resources. Frank activated countermeasures designed for this contingency, decoy heat signatures created by chemical heating packs positioned at false locations, signal jammers affecting specific frequencies used by commercial drones, and improvised electromagnetic pulse devices that would disrupt electronic surveillance equipment when triggered. These preparations weren't standard ranch defense, but specialized countermeasures from his final military deployments against technologically advanced opposition. At 12:30 p.m., Frank detected Vargas's arrival, the black Escalade approaching with security escort, stopping at command position established beyond property perimeter. The cartel leader emerged wearing tactical gear rather than business attire, another indicator of operational escalation. Through directional microphone, Frank captured fragments of tactical briefing as Vargas addressed team leaders. Confirmed military background, likely special forces, prepared defensive positions, systematic approach required. The assessment was accurate but incomplete. Vargas had identified Frank's military training but underestimated both its extent and specialization. Conventional special forces tactics would be recognizable to someone with Vargas's background. Frank's experience extended beyond conventional operations to classified counterinsurgency and deep penetration reconnaissance, specialized methodologies developed for asymmetric engagement against superior forces. The cartel operation began with technological surveillance, drones deployed for aerial reconnaissance, thermal imaging devices scanning structures for heat signatures, signal detection equipment searching for electronic emissions. Frank observed through his camera network, calculating timing for counter-response. The initial scans would detect decoy signatures and equipment deliberately positioned to create false positive indicators, drawing attention to unoccupied locations. After 30 minutes of scanning, tactical teams began methodical approach toward identified heat signatures. Frank activated prepared countermeasures, electromagnetic pulse devices disrupting thermal equipment, localized signal jammers blocking drone control frequencies, and pre-positioned speakers broadcasting recorded movement sounds at multiple locations. The combination created sensory confusion, degrading technological advantage while supplying misleading intelligence. Vargas's tactical experience showed in his response, pausing electronic surveillance and deploying personnel for visual confirmation. The approach demonstrated patience and professional discipline, avoiding impulsive reaction to countermeasures. Frank recognized the tactical chess match had escalated to advanced level, operator against operator rather than conventional forces against civilian resistance. By mid-afternoon, cartel forces had established complete perimeter control while methodically investigating structures. Their approach remained disciplined despite countermeasures, indicating specialized training beyond standard cartel operations. Frank maintained observation without engagement, gathering intelligence on tactical patterns while preserving his concealed position. At 3:47 p.m., the tactical dynamic shifted when Vargas implemented psychological operations, vehicle-mounted speakers broadcasting amplified message across the property. Franklin Harmon, your military background is confirmed and respected. Our intelligence indicates Army Special Forces, likely Ranger qualification, with multiple combat deployments. Professional courtesy has been extended beyond normal protocols in recognition of your service record. Final opportunity to accept generous terms is offered before conclusion of this operation. The announcement confirmed intelligence breach. Vargas had accessed military service records or received information from compromised sources. However, the specificity revealed incomplete intelligence. Frank's most significant operations remained classified, his specialized training unknown to conventional record systems. Frank maintained communication discipline, offering no response to the psychological operation. Instead, he continued documenting cartel force deployment, identifying specialized personnel by equipment and positioning. The tactical teams demonstrated varying levels of training. Primary security clearly ex-military with coordinated movement patterns. Secondary personnel showing cartel background with less disciplined tactical behavior. At 4:30 p.m., Vargas escalated to direct action. Tactical teams initiating coordinated approach toward the barn and storm cellar. Their movement patterns indicated thermal detection had identified the underground space despite countermeasures. Frank activated secondary defensive protocol, remotely triggered devices creating diversionary explosions at multiple locations across the property. The controlled detonations, propane tanks with minimal explosive enhancement, produced sufficient concussive effect and visual signature to disrupt tactical movement without causing casualties. Cartel forces responded with professional discipline, taking covered positions while maintaining tactical integrity. Vargas could be seen directing response from command position, implementing contingency protocols rather than reactive engagement. Frank recognized decisive moment approaching, continuing passive observation surrendered initiative, while direct engagement against superior force risked tactical defeat. The situation required asymmetric response leveraging specialized training beyond conventional military doctrine. At precisely 5:17 p.m., as shadow patterns created optimal visual concealment along eastern approach route, Frank executed pre-planned exfiltration from the storm cellar. Moving through prepared tunnel access behind storage shelving, he emerged 50 yards from the structure in dense brush concealed from observation positions. The exit point had been prepared years earlier, not for cartel engagement, but from habitual security consciousness developed through decades of operations. Carrying essential equipment: M4 carbine with suppressor, 1911 sidearm, night vision capability, tactical communications, and survival kit, Frank moved using specialized infiltration technique developed for jungle operations in Southeast Asia. The methodology minimized visual signature and sound projection while maintaining rapid movement through contested terrain. Within 20 minutes, he had bypassed cartel perimeter positions without detection, achieving tactical advantage through unexpected mobility. From elevated position 200 yards beyond property boundary, Frank implemented next phase, transition from defensive posture to offensive engagement. Not through direct confrontation against superior numbers, but through systematic degradation of operational capability. The approach targeted critical vulnerabilities in professional operations: communication dependency, command structure, and equipment reliance. Frank began with communication disruption, precision fire targeting visible radio equipment among perimeter personnel. Each shot was calculated for equipment damage without personnel injury, using suppressed rifle to minimize acoustic signature. Within 12 minutes, 7 communication devices had been disabled, creating fragmented tactical awareness among cartel forces without revealing firing position. Vargas's response demonstrated professional threat assessment, immediate relocation of command position to hardened vehicle, deployment of counter-sniper teams, and implementation of communication redundancy protocols. The cartel leader recognized asymmetric engagement pattern rather than random interference, adjusting tactical posture accordingly. As darkness approached, Frank executed controlled withdrawal from initial firing position, relocating to secondary location using terrain features for concealment. The movement anticipated Vargas's counter-sniper deployment, avoiding conventional engagement zones while maintaining offensive capability. From new position, Frank initiated secondary target engagement, precision fire disabling vehicle optics, external communications equipment, and perimeter lighting systems. The systematic degradation of technological capability forced cartel operations toward basic tactical methods, reduced visibility, compromised communication, and disrupted command structure. These conditions favored asymmetric engagement by single operator with specialized training against conventional force structure. Vargas adapted with professional competence, consolidating forces into defensive formation while implementing counter-ambush protocols. Tactical teams established overlapping fields of fire, minimizing exposed positions while maintaining operational integrity. The approach would be effective against conventional threat, but created predictable positioning vulnerable to unconventional response. As full darkness descended at 7:22 p.m., Frank transitioned to night operations protocol, methodology developed during classified counterinsurgency operations targeting technological superiority through fundamental environmental adaptation. Instead of relying on night vision equipment vulnerable to detection, he implemented native nocturnal capability developed through specialized training, sensory adaptation techniques allowing operational function in darkness without technological enhancement. Moving through property perimeter using natural terrain features and practiced spatial awareness, Frank penetrated cartel defensive formation without technological signature detectable by monitoring equipment. The approach bypassed conventional security expectation, achieving tactical positioning that conventional doctrine considered impossible without specialized equipment. From infiltrated position within cartel perimeter, Frank implemented targeted response against command structure, not through direct engagement with Vargas, but through systematic isolation of the commander from operational units. Precision placement of remaining diversionary devices at communication relay positions, coordinated disabling of backup equipment, and creation of false contact reports through captured radio frequencies progressively degraded command function while creating tactical confusion. Vargas's experience was evident in his response, recognition of command degradation and implementation of decentralized authority protocols. Tactical team leaders received autonomous operational authority with coordination through visual signaling rather than compromised electronic communication. The adaptation demonstrated advanced tactical training beyond conventional security operations. Frank recognized escalation decision point. Continued asymmetric engagement would eventually exhaust prepared countermeasures without achieving strategic resolution. Vargas possessed resources for extended operation, including personnel rotation and equipment replacement. Tactical victory required direct resolution rather than prolonged engagement. At 9:45 p.m., Frank implemented decisive action, deliberate revelation of position through controlled initiation of farmhouse generators powering full exterior illumination. The unexpected light activation momentarily disrupted night vision adaptation among cartel personnel, creating tactical opportunity through sensory disruption. During this vulnerability window, Frank transmitted on cartel communication frequency, Vargas, Southern Ridge position. Come alone for professional resolution. Alternative is continued degradation of your force without tactical conclusion. The direct challenge leveraged psychological assessment from previous encounters. Vargas's professional military background created predictable response to peer-level confrontation. Pride and operational frustration would motivate personal engagement, where tactical doctrine would dictate continued collective response. Through night vision, Frank observed Vargas's command vehicle position, tracking response to transmission. After brief consultation with security team, Vargas exited the vehicle with sidearm visible in tactical holster. His movement toward designated position was cautious but deliberate, balancing tactical awareness with psychological commitment to direct resolution. Frank maintained observation as Vargas approached, assessing security response and potential contingency deployment. Two security personnel followed at distance, maintaining visual contact while providing coverage without direct accompaniment. Vargas had accepted the professional challenge while implementing reasonable security protocol, the response of an experienced operator rather than cartel intimidator. When Vargas reached the designated position, a natural clearing providing visibility while limiting concealed approach, Frank initiated direct contact through targeted illumination. A focused beam from prepared position highlighted Vargas without revealing Frank's exact location, creating tactical advantage while enabling face-to-face communication. "That's far enough," Frank called, his voice carrying the controlled command presence developed through decades of military leadership. Vargas stopped, hands positioned for visibility without surrendering defensive capability. His tactical positioning demonstrated professional training, balanced stance, angular presentation minimizing target profile, calculated distance maintaining response options. "Impressive operational response, Mr. Harmon," Vargas stated, his tone reflecting professional assessment rather than criminal intimidation. "Your record indicates Ranger qualification, but your tactics suggest additional specialized training. Clearly, we've underestimated your capabilities." "Deliberate misconception," Frank replied. "My actual service record remains classified. What you accessed was administrative documentation, not operational history." Vargas nodded slowly, reassessing tactical situation based on this information. "That explains the unconventional response methodology. Counterinsurgency specialization, I suspect, given the systematic degradation approach rather than direct engagement. Vietnam-era original training with subsequent operational evolution through classified deployments." The accurate assessment confirmed Vargas's military intelligence background. Few security professionals could identify specialized operational methodologies from tactical indicators alone. Frank maintained position advantage while acknowledging the analysis with slight nod. "Your operation is compromised," Frank stated. 12 of your personnel have non-lethal injuries requiring medical attention. Communication infrastructure degraded beyond field repair capability. Surveillance equipment systematically disabled. Continuing tactical engagement guarantees additional casualties without achieving operational objective. Vargas maintained professional composure despite the tactical assessment. "Impressive for single-operator engagement, yet ultimately unsustainable against our resources. We can deploy replacement personnel and equipment indefinitely. Your countermeasures will eventually exhaust, regardless of specialized training." "Incorrect tactical assessment," Frank countered. "Local law enforcement has been monitoring this engagement through my veteran support network. Documentation of cartel personnel, equipment, and operational methodology has been transmitted to multiple agencies. Continued operation guarantees federal response with corresponding consequences." The information visibly impacted Vargas's tactical calculation. His expression shifted from professional confidence to strategic reassessment. Verification of this claim? Frank activated remote trigger, initiating playback of recorded radio transmissions between Jim's veteran network and local law enforcement through speakers positioned near Vargas's location. The audio confirmed surveillance documentation and coordination with authorities, creating verified tactical intelligence rather than psychological manipulation. Vargas listened without interruption, his military training evident in controlled response to strategic compromise. When the playback concluded, he maintained professional demeanor while processing altered operational reality. "It appears we've reached tactical stalemate," Vargas stated. "Your defensive capabilities exceed operational parameters for acceptable loss ratio. However, our strategic objectives remain unchanged. This territory is essential for operational infrastructure. Your strategic assessment is compromised by tactical fixation," Frank responded. "This property's value derives from perceived isolation and minimal law enforcement presence. That perception is now invalidated. Continued operation in this location guarantees heightened scrutiny regardless of property acquisition." The analysis penetrated Vargas's professional calculation, addressing strategic reality beyond immediate tactical situation. His expression reflected recognition of fundamental operational compromise independent of current engagement resolution. "Alternative strategic options exist," Frank continued, leveraging the psychological opening. Northeastern Corridor offers superior topographical features with equivalent isolation metrics and established property control opportunities. Tactical redeployment preserves operational capability while mitigating escalated enforcement attention. Vargas's expression revealed recognition of valid strategic assessment. You've conducted terrain analysis beyond defensive preparation. Operational planning for counter-response rather than merely territorial defense. Standard protocol for asymmetric engagement against superior force, Frank confirmed. Tactical victory requires strategic alternative offering acceptable outcome for opposition leadership. Otherwise, rational response is continued escalation regardless of immediate losses. The conversation had transitioned from confrontation to professional exchange between experienced operators, tactical chess players recognizing mutual capability while calculating optimal resolution. Vargas maintained silence for calculated interval, processing strategic implications beyond immediate engagement. Veteran to veteran, Vargas finally stated, I recognize professional courtesy in your approach. Disabling equipment rather than personnel. Non-lethal injuries despite multiple lethal opportunity windows. Tactical degradation with minimal permanent impact. Frank acknowledged with slight nod. The observation was accurate. His engagement had deliberately maintained proportional response despite tactical opportunities for more permanent resolution. Not from operational limitation, but professional discipline developed through legitimate military service rather than criminal application of tactical training. Corresponding professional courtesy would involve tactical withdrawal without prejudice, Frank suggested. Your operation relocates to more advantageous territory without enforcement attention. My property remains undisturbed without further engagement. Mutual disengagement with respective objectives partially secured. Vargas considered the proposal with evident tactical calculation. Verification mechanism for enforcement standing down? Local sheriff contacts state police to cancel response request, Frank detailed. Confirmation provided through established communication channel before your withdrawal initiates. Veteran Network stands down surveillance and documentation activities upon verification of your complete withdrawal. The proposed resolution offered professional compromise addressing core requirements for both parties, territorial integrity for Frank, operational continuation without enforcement complication for Vargas. The cartel leader's military background created foundation for professional resolution transcending criminal intimidation methodology. Acceptable terms, Vargas finally stated, with additional non-aggression provision. Your veteran network maintains operational distance from our Northeastern Corridor activities. No surveillance, documentation, or enforcement coordination regarding operations outside your territorial concern. The counterproposal represented reasonable tactical limitation, preventing continued interference while respecting established boundaries. Frank calculated acceptable risk ratio, given available intelligence on Northeastern Corridor conditions and existing enforcement coverage. Agreed, with territorial limitation, Frank specified. Non-interference applies exclusively to operational territory minimum 20 miles from any veteran network property or personnel. Community defense remains active within that boundary regardless of your operational parameters. Vargas nodded, accepting the geographical constraint as reasonable preservation of respective interest zones. Then we have resolution framework. Tactical withdrawal will commence upon verification of enforcement standing down. Complete disengagement within 4 hours of verification. No subsequent contact or territorial incursion. Acceptable, Frank confirmed. Communication channel remains open for withdrawal coordination. Veteran Network maintains observation until complete disengagement verified. The agreement established professional resolution to tactical confrontation, neither side achieving complete objective, but both securing essential requirements without unacceptable loss. Vargas extended formal acknowledgement through military courtesy, rendering abbreviated salute that recognized professional respect rather than subordination. Your operational capability is impressive, Ghost, Vargas stated, using Frank's Vietnam-era call sign. The reference confirmed intelligence penetration beyond standard records, accessing classified operation documentation or human intelligence from former military contacts. That designation remains classified, Frank responded, neither confirming nor denying the identification. Vargas smiled with professional appreciation. Information access extends beyond conventional channels in my organization. Your reputation in certain operational circles remains significant. The jungle extraction under compromised conditions in 72. The embassy operation in 84. Several subsequent classifications even my sources couldn't penetrate. Your presence in this location was deemed logistically improbable given operational history. The detailed knowledge of classified operations confirmed sophisticated intelligence capability beyond cartel resources, likely indicating government connections through Vargas's former military position. Frank maintained operational security despite the revealed knowledge, neither confirming nor correcting the intelligence assessment. Resolution parameters established, Frank stated, redirecting conversation to immediate tactical considerations. Initiate withdrawal coordination through established channel. Verification protocols as specified. Vargas accepted the professional redirection without comment, recognizing operational discipline that transcended personal history. With final acknowledging nod, he turned and moved with tactical precision back toward his command position, maintaining awareness of surroundings despite negotiated resolution. Frank maintained observation position until Vargas reached his security team, then implemented controlled extraction to secondary location with superior defensive characteristics. Professional resolution established parameters for disengagement, but tactical discipline required contingency positioning until verified withdrawal completed. Over the next 3 hours, Frank monitored cartel disengagement through his surveillance network. The withdrawal proceeded with military precision, systematic equipment recovery, personnel extraction in tactical sequence, and verification procedures at each phase. Vargas supervised directly, maintaining professional discipline throughout the operation with no deviation from agreed parameters. By 2:17 a.m., verification confirmed complete cartel withdrawal from property perimeter and surrounding observation positions. Frank maintained vigilance from defensive position, recognizing possibility of deception despite professional agreement. Only after comprehensive scanning with night vision equipment and thermal detection confirmed absence of remaining personnel did he initiate contact with support network. Scarecrow secure. Opposition withdrawn per negotiated resolution. Maintain perimeter observation for 12 hours to verify complete disengagement. Jim's acknowledgement came immediately, confirmed. Observation teams report convoy movement eastward consistent with northeastern corridor relocation. Sheriff confirmed state police stand-down completed. Local enforcement resuming normal patrol patterns. Acknowledged. Proceeding to recovery phase. Maintain alert status until 1400 hours. Frank executed systematic property clearing, approaching the farmhouse using tactical movement patterns, securing each structure with professional methodology before confirming safe status. The buildings showed expected damage from cartel search operations, but no booby traps or surveillance devices remained active. His home had been violated but remained structurally intact, requiring repairs but not replacement. In the kitchen, Frank found unexpected message, military challenge coin placed precisely at center of table, visible immediately upon entry. The coin's design identified Mexican Special Forces unit with Vargas's service dates engraved on reverse side. The traditional military courtesy acknowledged professional respect between operators beyond immediate tactical engagement. Frank placed the coin in his pocket without comment, recognizing the gesture's significance without emotional response. Professional acknowledgement between opponents with shared military foundation, regardless of current operational alignment. Throughout his career, similar exchanges had occurred across political boundaries and operational objectives, the brotherhood of professional soldiers transcending temporary opposition. As dawn approached, Frank completed property assessment and began initial recovery operations. The tactical engagement had resulted in significant equipment damage and structural impacts requiring extensive repair. Physical recovery would consume weeks of effort and substantial resources. Yet the essential objective had been secured: territorial integrity maintained against determined opposition through asymmetric application of specialized training. Frank placed brief call to Bill Mercer, providing minimal information about resolved situation while confirming cartel withdrawal. The deputy's relief was evident despite professional attempt at neutral response. "Frank, what exactly happened out there?" Bill asked after confirming no immediate threat remained. Jim's guys reported some kind of tactical standoff, but details were operational security restricted. "Situation resolved through professional negotiation," Frank replied, providing essential outcome without operational details. "Cartel forces have withdrawn with agreement for non-interference. Property sustained damage but remains secure." Bill's silence communicated skeptical assessment of the simplified explanation. When he spoke again, his tone carried both concern and reluctant admiration. "One man against cartel tactical team led by former military commander. That's not negotiation, Frank. That's something else entirely." "Assessment parameters classified," Frank responded, the automatic security response emerging from decades of operational discipline. Then, recognizing the deputy's legitimate concern, he added, "Situation stabilized through mutual professional respect. No anticipated recurrence." After ending the call, Frank moved to the porch and settled into his rocking chair as first light illuminated damage across his property. The tactical engagement had been successful by core mission parameters: territorial integrity maintained, hostile force neutralized without friendly casualties, sustainable resolution established. Yet the Rangers' objective evaluation recognized significant impacts requiring extended recovery operations. As he calculated repair requirements and security enhancements, Frank experienced unexpected psychological response: combat satisfaction dormant for decades reactivating through successful mission execution. The tactical challenge had engaged specialized capabilities developed throughout military career, confirming operational effectiveness despite advanced age and civilian transition. The realization carried complex implications. His military effectiveness remained intact, preserved through disciplined maintenance despite 15 years of retirement. The tactical mindset continued functioning at optimal level when activated by legitimate threat. The specialized training retained operational value against contemporary opposition despite technological evolution and methodological advancement. Frank watched sunrise illuminate his damaged property with tactical satisfaction balancing property owners' concern. Professional capability had preserved territorial integrity where civilian response would have guaranteed defeat. Military experience had transformed existential threat into negotiated resolution. Special operations training had converted tactical disadvantage to strategic victory. The week following the confrontation passed in methodical recovery. Frank approached property restoration with the same disciplined efficiency he'd applied to tactical defense: systematic assessment, prioritized response, and measured execution. The farmhouse required substantial repairs: broken doors, damaged furniture, compromised security features. The barn showed less structural impact, but significant content disruption. Exterior installations, fencing, lighting, irrigation, needed comprehensive restoration. Jim and 3 other veterans arrived uninvited the morning after withdrawal confirmation, carrying tools and materials without prior notification. Frank found them at the damaged front porch, already removing splintered boards and measuring replacement dimensions. "Didn't request assistance," Frank stated, approaching the unexpected support team. Jim continued working without pausing. Operational Protocol, Sergeant Major. Unit integrity during recovery phase. The reference to military procedure carried implicit understanding. Team members support comrades during post-mission reconstruction. The other veterans nodded in silent agreement, continuing their assigned tasks with practiced coordination. Frank recognized the gesture transcended civilian assistance, representing something deeper, brotherhood forged through shared service, activated by common purpose despite decades of separation. After brief consideration, Frank nodded once in acceptance. Recovery parameters established. Interior structural integrity primary objective. Security perimeter secondary. Cosmetic restoration tertiary. The veterans acknowledged the prioritization with military precision, adjusting their activities to align with established parameters. No further discussion occurred regarding authorization or necessity. The mission had been defined. Execution proceeded accordingly. Throughout the day, Frank observed their work with growing appreciation. These weren't random community members offering neighborly help, but trained operators executing recovery operations with professional discipline. Jim coordinated team movements with hand signals and minimal verbal communication. Mike Wheeler mapped damaged systems with methodical documentation before initiating repairs. Rodriguez and Thompson maintained security awareness while working, positioning themselves with overlapping fields of view despite focusing on restoration tasks. Their shared military background created operational efficiency impossible with civilian assistance. When Frank retrieved stored lumber from beneath the barn, Jim automatically established carry positions optimized for weight distribution. When replacing broken window frames required precise measurements, Mike implemented field-expedient tools with practiced confidence. When security system restoration demanded specialized knowledge, Rodriguez applied communication equipment experience from his service period without requiring detailed instruction. By evening, the primary structural damage had been addressed, entry points secured, essential systems restored, and basic functionality reestablished. The veterans departed with minimal conversation, Jim confirming return at 0700 the following morning to continue secondary objectives. No discussion of compensation or obligation occurred. Mission parameters established, execution proceeding per operational expectation. That night, alone in his partially restored home, Frank experienced unexpected reflection. The instinctive activation of military capability during the confrontation had confirmed his tactical effectiveness remained intact. The veterans' response to recovery needs demonstrated something more significant: community integrity transcending civilian transition. These men had recognized fellow operator in need, mobilizing available resources without formal request or organizational structure. The support network had functioned with military precision despite decades of civilian integration. The revelation contradicted Frank's long-held perspective on retirement transition. Since leaving active service, he had maintained physical capability and tactical awareness through disciplined routine, but deliberately minimized connection to military community. His identity had been carefully compartmentalized, Ranger operations locked in secured memory, civilian existence maintained through practice separation. The cartel confrontation had demolished that artificial boundary, revealing integrated identity where military capability enhanced civilian resilience rather than conflicting with retirement transition. The following morning, Frank found himself automatically reverting to command role as the veterans returned. His instructions emerged with natural authority, directing recovery operations through efficient tasking rather than civilian coordination. The team responded with immediate compliance, recognizing legitimate leadership rather than neighborly suggestion. By midday, their operation had attracted notice: Bill Mercer's patrol car approaching the property with deliberate caution. The deputy surveyed the coordinated activity with professional assessment before addressing Frank directly. County received reports of unusual activity at your property. Multiple personnel, equipment movement, systematic operation patterns. Property restoration following damage incidents, Frank replied, maintaining controlled information disclosure. Bill studied the veterans working with disciplined coordination across the property. Looks more like military operation than civilian repairs. His tone carried no accusation, merely professional observation. Frank acknowledged with slight nod. Recovery team comprised of veterans with shared operational background. Efficient methodology produces optimal restoration results. The deputy's expression combined concern with reluctant admiration. Frank, what exactly happened here? Reports describe tactical engagement beyond civilian capability. Then coordinated withdrawal of suspected cartel personnel from entire region, not just your property. Now military precision recovery operation. This fits pattern beyond standard property dispute. Frank recognized legitimate law enforcement inquiry requiring measured response balancing security considerations with community protection. Situation resolved through professional channels. Regional threat neutralized through negotiated resolution. No continuing security concerns requiring official intervention. Bill maintained direct eye contact, professional assessment evident in his expression. That explanation might satisfy official documentation requirements. Between us, between someone who carried a badge for 30 years and someone who clearly operated at levels I can only imagine, what really happened? The question penetrated Frank's habitual security barrier, recognizing fellow professional, deserving operational understanding beyond civilian explanation. After calculated consideration, Frank provided limited but substantive response. Cartel tactical team encountered specialized resistance beyond anticipated capability. Operational commander recognized unsustainable engagement parameters despite superior resources. Professional resolution established through mutual recognition of unacceptable loss ratio versus strategic objectives. The deputy processed this information with experienced assessment, translating military terminology into practical understanding. You engaged specialized training against cartel forces, achieved tactical stalemate despite numerical disadvantage, and negotiated withdrawal from superior leverage position. Frank neither confirmed nor denied the accurate interpretation. Bill studied him with renewed perspective, connecting observed property security measures with demonstrated tactical capability. Those rumors about your military background, not just regular army, but something more specialized. Vietnam-era operations that remained classified. Subsequent deployments under operational security beyond standard military protocols. The deputy wasn't asking questions, but verbalizing revised assessment based on demonstrated evidence. Information remains compartmentalized for operational security requirements. Frank responded automatically, neither confirming nor correcting the assessment. Bill nodded with professional understanding. Need to know basis. Understood. He surveyed the ongoing recovery operation once more before adding, for what it's worth, the cartel withdrawal extends beyond your property. Northeastern corridor movement confirmed by Border Patrol surveillance. Regional operational structure completely relocated within 24 hours of your negotiated resolution. Whatever you did created impact far beyond local territory dispute. The information confirmed Vargas's compliance with negotiated terms, complete operational relocation rather than tactical withdrawal. Professional integrity honoring agreement between operators despite criminal organizational structure. The confirmation reinforced Frank's assessment of Vargas's military background superseding cartel methodology during resolution phase. After the deputy departed, Frank continued directing recovery operations with renewed perspective. The artificial separation between military capability and civilian existence had been permanently breached, not through deliberate integration but crisis-driven necessity. The revelation required psychological adjustment beyond physical property restoration. On the third recovery day, unexpected visitors arrived, local families bringing food, materials, and volunteer assistance. Word had spread through community channels about Frank's confrontation with cartel forces, transforming perception from reclusive landowner to protective community member. The narrative had evolved without his guidance. Former military man defending territory against criminal organization, protecting region through personal courage rather than surrendering to intimidation. Frank found himself uncomfortable with the attention, yet recognizing its strategic value. Community awareness provided additional security through collective vigilance. Local support enhanced recovery capability through material and personnel resources. Public narrative created deterrent effect against potential future incursions through demonstrated community cohesion against criminal elements. As civilian volunteers integrated with veteran recovery team, Frank observed natural organizational structure developing. Veterans assuming coordination roles, civilians providing specialized skills, mutual support emerging through common purpose rather than formal direction. The operational pattern reflected fundamental military principle adapted to civilian application. Mission-focused cooperation transcending individual limitation through collective capability. That evening, community members organized informal gathering at the partially restored farmhouse. Tables appeared with shared food, conversation focused on regional security concerns, and veterans exchanging contact information with local ranchers for future cooperation. Without formal planning, community defense network was organically developing. Shared awareness, communication protocols, and mutual support agreements establishing regional security infrastructure beyond individual property protection. Frank found himself central to this emerging structure despite habitual isolation tendency. His tactical expertise and demonstrated effectiveness against superior threat created natural leadership position. Local residents sought his assessment of property vulnerabilities. Fellow veterans coordinated future response protocols under his guidance. Even Bill Mercer participated, establishing official communication channels between community network and law enforcement resources. The transformation extended beyond physical recovery to fundamental identity integration. Frank's compartmentalized existence, military capability separated from civilian persona, had been rendered obsolete through crisis response. His effectiveness against cartel threat had emerged not from separate tactical identity but integrated capability where military experience enhanced civilian resilience through applied knowledge rather than isolated skill set. As recovery operations progressed through subsequent days, Frank implemented this integrated approach to restoration decisions. Security enhancements incorporated tactical principles while maintaining functional civilian appearance. Communication systems established redundancy protocols from military experience while utilizing civilian technology. Community coordination leveraged command structure methodologies while respecting civilian autonomy. 2 weeks after the confrontation, physical restoration reached substantial completion. The farmhouse structure had been repaired, security features enhanced, and property functionality restored. The volunteer teams gradually dispersed, returning to normal activities while maintaining established communication network. The veterans completed final technical installations before departing with simple acknowledgement of mission completion. Alone on his porch that evening, Frank surveyed the restored property with professional assessment. The physical recovery had achieved primary objectives, structural integrity restored, security capabilities enhanced, and functional operations reestablished. Yet the most significant transformation remained invisible to external observation, the psychological integration occurring within his own perspective. For 15 years since retirement, Frank had maintained artificial separation between military identity and civilian existence. His tactical awareness, physical discipline, and security consciousness had been compartmentalized as residual military characteristics rather than integrated capabilities enhancing civilian life. The cartel confrontation had demolished that artificial boundary, revealing fundamental truth about his essential nature. He remained the operator his military experience had created, adapting specialized capability to civilian application rather than abandoning fundamental identity. The following morning, Frank received visit from Jim, arriving alone rather than with recovery team. The fellow veteran carried folder of documents rather than tools, his expression conveying purpose beyond property restoration. Community Defense Network documentation, Jim explained, presenting the folder without preamble. Operational structure, communication protocols, resource inventory, and response parameters. Requires command authorization before implementation. Frank accepted the documentation with automatic response, reviewing contents with professional assessment. The materials detailed comprehensive regional security network property vulnerabilities cataloged with mitigation recommendations, communication equipment distributed strategically across local ranches. Response teams organized with designated leadership and equipment caches. The structure reflected military organizational principles adapted for civilian application, command hierarchy, operational specialization, and mission-focused protocols within legal civilian parameters. Command authorization, Frank repeated, recognizing implied designation beyond documentation review. Jim nodded with direct acknowledgement. Network effectiveness requires experienced leadership, tactical expertise, operational planning capability, and command presence. Your qualification parameters exceed all regional alternatives. The proposition represented fundamental transformation beyond physical recovery or community engagement, formal integration of military capability within civilian structure through leadership position. Not temporary crisis response, but established operational role connecting former military identity with current civilian existence. Frank considered the proposal with characteristic methodical assessment. Accepting command responsibility contradicted his long-established isolation protocol. Minimal community engagement, limited relationship development, and compartmentalized existence. Yet the cartel confrontation had demonstrated protection capability extended beyond personal territory to regional security through applied tactical expertise. Individual effectiveness achieved maximum impact through organizational structure rather than isolated operation. Command parameters? Frank asked, evaluating operational requirements before commitment decision. Quarterly readiness assessment, monthly communication system verification, and incident-specific response coordination, Jim detailed. Administrative requirements minimized through delegation structure. Operational activation only during verified threat conditions. The defined parameters balance security effectiveness with practical civilian integration, limited time commitment during normal conditions, escalated involvement only during legitimate threat scenarios. The structure acknowledged both expertise contribution and civilian life preservation through efficient organizational design. After calculated consideration, Frank provided command decision with characteristic brevity. Operational structure approved with monthly leadership rotation among qualified veterans. Command responsibility distributed rather than centralized for sustainability and succession planning. Jim nodded with professional understanding, recognizing both acceptance of responsibility and tactical modification enhancing long-term operational viability. No further discussion required, mission parameters established, execution proceeding accordingly. As Jim departed with authorized documentation, Frank returned to his porch, surveying his restored property with integrated perspective. The physical recovery had erased visible evidence of confrontation, repaired structures, restored systems, and renewed functionality creating appearance of normality. Yet fundamental transformation remained, not in physical surroundings, but personal identity integration. Frank Harmon, retired Army Ranger with classified operational history, had entered the confrontation as isolated property owner with compartmentalized military capability. He emerged as integrated community defender with acknowledged leadership role connecting former service with current civilian purpose. The artificial boundary between military past and civilian present had dissolved through crisis response, revealing essential continuity transcending service transition. As evening approached, Frank performed his daily security check with modified awareness. The perimeter survey no longer represented isolated territory defense, but component of regional security network. His tactical assessment incorporated community vulnerability beyond property boundaries. His security protocols considered coordinated response capability rather than individual defensive positions. Returning to the porch as darkness settled across the desert landscape, Frank recognized the most significant revelation emerging from confrontation aftermath. His military service had never truly ended, but merely transformed through application context. The tactical expertise, leadership capability, and operational discipline developed through decades of service remained essential components of his fundamental identity, now directed toward community protection rather than national security objectives. The realization brought unexpected peace, not through separation from military past, but integration with civilian present. Frank Harmon, the ghost of Vietnam operations and classified deployments, continued serving through transformed application rather than terminated capability. The elderly rancher and the special operations veteran existed as integrated identity rather than compartmentalized personas. As stars appeared above his restored farm, Frank accepted this transformation with characteristic stoic acknowledgement. The confrontation had revealed not who he had been, but who he remained. Defender, protector, and operator adapted to civilian application while maintaining essential nature formed through military service. The revelation completed his long transition from active duty, not through separation from military identity, but through integration with civilian purpose. Frank Harmon had come home not when he purchased the farm 15 years earlier, but when he defended it with everything his service had made him. 3 months after the confrontation, Frank's property showed few visible signs of the engagement. The repaired farmhouse gleamed with fresh paint, gardens flourished under careful tending, and cattle grazed peacefully across restored pastures. To casual observers, the scene represented typical rural tranquility, an aging rancher maintaining family property through dedicated effort and community support. Only subtle indicators revealed the transformed reality beneath this pastoral appearance: security cameras disguised within natural features, communication antenna integrated with windmill structure, and occasional gatherings where pickup trucks bearing veteran license plates lined the driveway. The community defense network operated with quiet efficiency, maintaining vigilance without disrupting normal activities. Frank continued his daily routines with characteristic discipline. Morning exercise, property maintenance, and agricultural tasks performed with methodical precision. Yet these familiar patterns now incorporated additional responsibilities: monitoring regional security feeds, coordinating communication system checks, and conducting training sessions for local ranchers on property protection methodology. The veteran command rotation had proven effective, distributing leadership responsibility among qualified individuals while maintaining operational cohesion. Frank's role had evolved toward strategic oversight rather than daily management, his experience providing foundational guidance, while others implemented tactical operations. The structure balanced security effectiveness with sustainable civilian integration. Border Patrol and local law enforcement had acknowledged the community network's legitimacy through informal cooperation channels. Bill Mercer coordinated official information sharing while respecting operational independence. The arrangement established mutual support without bureaucratic constraints, professional cooperation based on shared protection objectives rather than jurisdictional requirements. True to negotiated terms, cartel operations had remained absent from the region. Intelligence sources confirmed Vargas had established extensive infrastructure along the northeastern corridor, focusing organizational resources on territory outside community network boundaries. The professional agreement between operators had maintained integrity despite criminal context, mutual respect transcending operational objectives. On a quiet Tuesday evening, Frank sat on his porch as sunset painted the desert landscape in brilliant orange and purple hues. The scene mirrored countless evenings before the confrontation, yet his perception had fundamentally transformed. Where once he had viewed his property as isolated territory requiring individual defense, he now recognized its connection to surrounding community through shared vulnerability and mutual protection. The cartel's defeat was undeniable. Though some questioned the extent of Frank's actions, most celebrated the powerful message sent. America does not bow to intimidation. Frank, humble yet firm, quietly stepped back from the limelight, continuing duties without fanfare, steadfast in moral clarity. His story stands as a testament to an enduring American truth, that genuine strength lies not in aggression but in preparedness, resolve, and the unwavering commitment to justice and liberty for all. What do you think about this incredible stand? Do you believe strength alone guarantees justice, or does real power lie in partnership, strategy, and bravery? Share your perspective in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe for more gripping real-life stories of courage in the face of overwhelming odds. As darkness settled across the property, Frank completed his evening security check with integrated awareness, individual vigilance connected to community network through shared purpose and mutual support. The ghost of classified operations in the aging rancher existed as unified identity rather than compartmentalized personas. His military service and civilian life had merged through crisis into coherent whole, not through deliberate integration, but revealed compatibility. Frank Harmon, former Army Ranger with specialized operational history, had defended his territory not just for personal preservation but community protection. The confrontation had transformed perception from isolated veteran to essential community member, military capability enhancing civilian security through applied expertise rather than separated experience. As stars appeared above his peaceful farm, Frank acknowledged this transformation with characteristic stoic acceptance. The tactical engagement had revealed fundamental truth transcending specific confrontation. His lifetime of service continued through evolved application rather than terminated capability. The aging rancher and the special operations veteran represented continuous identity adapted to changing context rather than separate existences. The revelation completed his transition from military service, not through separation from operational identity but integration with civilian purpose. Frank Harmon had truly come home.